Hello, hello. This is part 5 of the Gentile Times Reconsidered Summarized. In our last video, we discussed how Watchtower has, over the years, attempted to synchronize the Bible's relative chronology with an absolute chronology that can be used to bridge the gap between the biblical period and our day, which is necessary if you're going to interpret supposed time prophecies and map them onto a chronology that gives you an end date like 1914. However, Watchtower has never truly established an absolute chronology that bridges this gap, because any documents they may try to appeal to will end up dating the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar and the destruction of Jerusalem to 587 BCE, not 607. In this video, we're going to summarize Chapter 3 of Jonsson's book, The Length of Reigns of the Neo-Babylonian Kings. He begins his discussion by noting the nature of the interpretation that produces the 1914 date. He notes that it involves a host of assumptions, that Jesus, in speaking of these Gentile times, had in mind the 7 times of Nebuchadnezzar's madness mentioned in the book of Daniel, chapter 4. That these 7 times were 7 years, that these 7 years were not ordinary Babylonian calendar years, but prophetic years of 360 days each, and should therefore be summed up as 2,520 days, and that these 2,520 days not only apply to the period of Nebuchadnezzar's madness, but also would have a greater fulfillment. And that in this greater fulfillment, days should be counted as years so that we get a period of 2,520 years, and that this 2,520 year period started when Nebuchadnezzar, in his 18th regnal year, desolated the city of Jerusalem. Jonsson goes on to say, none of these 6 assumptions can be verified by clear biblical statements. They are, in fact, nothing but a chain of haphazard guesses. Yet, since the Bible does not discuss or even mention any of these ideas, it nowhere explicitly says they are false either. In other words, each of these interpretive steps that he's outlining cannot be empirically verified or empirically falsified. They belong to the realm of interpretation, and as we all know, interpretation can involve a great deal of subjectivity. However, later in the book, Jonsson will argue against these interpretive steps, but he goes on to say in chapter 3, however, when it is further claimed that Nebuchadnezzar's desolation of Jerusalem took place in 607 BCE, we have reached a point in the train of thought that can be tested and disproven. This is because the chronology of the Neo-Babylonian period does not fall within the area of unverifiable assumptions. In other words, chronology falls outside of the realm of the subjective. This is the only part of Watchtower's scheme that is totally falsifiable in the objective and empirical realm of thought. So we're going to begin discussing this period that's so critical to Watchtower's claims. This is the period of time that's designated the Neo-Babylonian Period. It's a designation that marks a period when the Babylonian Empire started to emerge and become dominant in the ancient Near East. In our last video, we noted that Watchtower dates the first year of Cyrus the Persian, or Cyrus the Great, to 539 BCE. They take that to be Cyrus' first year, and they say that this is the date that gives them their absolute chronology. This dating for Cyrus the Great's first year is in agreement with modern scholarship. So that will work for us. We're going to use that as the end of the Neo-Babylonian period. So keep this date in mind as we consider the evidence for the entire period. And as a reminder, we need to determine the length of the reigns of the kings of this period to date the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. That's important because this is the year that the Bible says that Jerusalem was placed under siege and destroyed by the Babylonians. Jonsson begins by noting that before the 19th century, the only sources we could use to date the length of the reigns of these Babylonian kings were the texts of ancient historians that have survived to our time. One of these sources is from the writings of the Babylonian priest Berossus of the 3rd century BCE. He wrote histories of ancient Babylon in Greek that ended up being used by other ancient historians, and that's actually how we know about him. None of his original work survives to this day, but we have some of his work in quotes. He was quoted by other ancient historians, such as Josephus. So Berossus gives us these lengths for the Neo-Babylonian kings. If you like, you can pause the video now and pull out a calculator. You would add the years of the reigns of these kings to the number 539. If you add up all of these figures, you're going to get 625 BCE as the start date for the Neo-Babylonian period. So if we're trying to determine the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar, you'll exclude the reign of Nabopolassar, and you'll add 25 years for Nebuchadnezzar instead of 43. You'll then get the year 587 BCE. Now, this is the chronology that Berossus gives us. And if you were a 19th century historian of antiquity, you could also refer to Ptolemy's canon, which we talked about in our last video. It's also referred to as the royal canon. It serves as a source for an absolute chronology, so it links our modern period up with antiquity, and it gives us dates for the Neo-Babylonian kings. Scholars have concluded that this list of kings provided by the royal canon and the chronology here is probably completely independent from Berossus. So since it's an independent source, it's noteworthy that it also agrees with Berossus' dates. The only notable difference would be that it doesn't count the short reign of Labashi Marduk. However, this line of evidence is not conclusive on its own, as Jonsson notes, and it comes to us from a long series of textual transmission. So we need some way to confirm this chronology, and to do that, we need data directly from this period. Thankfully, this period, the Neo-Babylonian period that we're examining, is one of the most well-attested periods in the ancient world. Jonsson says, literally tens of thousands of texts have been found, primarily consisting of business, administrative, and legal documents, but there are also historical documents, such as chronicles and royal inscriptions. These texts provide chronological data that confirms the dates that are given to us by Berossus and the royal canon. So I'll quickly summarize what these texts are. And again, as I've mentioned already, if you'd like all of the detail that supports this evidence, you can refer to Jonsson's book. Jonsson walks us through the Royal Chronicle. This is a series of clay tablets that were copied and transmitted in the royal archives of Babylonian kings. These texts were originally composed during the period that it's describing. These records describe the length of the reign of Babylonian kings going all the way back before the Neo-Babylonian period and all the way up to the first year of Cyrus the Great. These tablets confirm the dates given to us by Berossus in the royal canon, which strengthens the case that both Berossus and the royal canon had access to reliable sources themselves. We also have a king list that was uncovered in 1960 in one of the most ancient cities in Mesopotamia, Uruk. This is known as the Uruk king list. It documents the length of the reigns of Assyrian, Babylonian, and even Elamite and Persian kings. On one tablet of the Uruk king list, it gives us the length of the Neo-Babylonian period. And while it matches, you'll notice a slight difference here. Labashi Marduk is assigned 3 months instead of 9 months. Jonsson says that this has been confirmed as the correct figure, and we're going to see that in later evidence. But the rough figures for these kings are the same as the other chronicles we've looked at so far. Another ancient text that helps us to confirm the chronology of this period is referred to as Nabon number 18. It's a cylinder inscription that records a lunar eclipse and dates it to the second year of Nabonidus, in a month on the Babylonian calendar which corresponds to roughly August, September, and sometimes October on the Gregorian calendar. What's fascinating is that this tablet even tells us the eclipse continued while the moon was setting and going over the horizon line. So in 1949, Dr. Hildegard Louis examined the eclipse and found that only once during Nabonidus' reign did such an eclipse take place, within a 50-year period prior to his reign. This eclipse lands on September 26, 554 BCE. The eclipse began at about 3 a.m. and lasted for 3 hours. This confirms the information that was in this cylinder and the dates that are provided for Nabonidus in these other chronicles that we've looked at. The next piece of the puzzle would be the Hylla stele. By the way, a stele is a monument. It's usually made of wood or stone that has text or images inscribed on it, usually by royal scribes. This is an inscription that was discovered about 4 miles south of ancient Babylon, that was originally composed by Nabonidus and his scribes. In the text, he describes a dream that he says he had in his accession year, that is, his first year, that compelled him to rebuild the temple to the moon god Sin, which was originally destroyed by the Medes. So let's read this text together. Concerning Haran and the Ahulhul, that's the name of the moon god's temple, which had been lying in ruins for 54 years because of its devastation by the Medes, who destroyed the sanctuaries with the consent of the gods. The time for reconciliation approached, 54 years, when Sin should be returned to his place. When he returned to his place, Sin, the lord of the tiara, remembered his lofty seat, and as to all the gods who left his chapel with him, it is Marduk, the king of the gods, who ordered their gathering. So Nabonidus is saying that he has a charge by the gods to rebuild the temple, and that this temple was destroyed 54 years before his first year. What's interesting is that this same event is described in the Babylonian Chronicle, the chronicle we've already referred to. The chronicle states that in the 16th year of Nabopolassar, in the month Marheshwan, that is, parts of October and November, and here's the quote, the Uman Manda, the Medes, who had come to help the king of Akkad, put their armies together and marched to Haran against Ashar Ubalit, who had ascended the throne in Assyria. The king of Akkad reached Haran, the location of the moon god temple, and he captured the city. He carried off the vast booty of the city and the temple. We have another independent inscription that also describes this event. It's called the Adad Gupi stele. It says, whereas in the 16th year of Nabopolassar, king of Babylon, Sin, king of the gods, with his city and his temple was angry and went up to heaven. The city and the people that were in it went to ruin. Both of these inscriptions independently confirm that this temple to Sin was destroyed in the 16th year of Nabopolassar. If we use the chronology that we've established from our previous sources, it agrees exactly with the time that's described in the Hylla stele, which states that this temple was destroyed 54 years before the first year of Nabonidus, which other texts tell us is the 16th year of Nabopolassar. It turns out that this distance in time given to us by these composite sources agree exactly with the other chronologies that we've seen thus far. There is a 54-year period between the 16th year of Nabopolassar and the first year of Nabonidus in these other chronicles as well. The last royal inscription we'll look at for now, we've just mentioned, the Arad Gupi stele. This inscription was found near Haran, which you might recall features in the life of Abraham in the Bible. It was discovered in 1906 and recognized as a royal inscription bearing chronological information. However, the chronological text was damaged on this particular artifact. However, exactly 50 years later, archaeologists found an exact replica of the original stele, with all of the chronological information intact. Here's the relevant section. From the 20th year of Ashurbanipal, king of Assyria, when I was born, until the 42nd year of Ashurbanipal, the 3rd year of his son, Ashur-atil-ili, the 21st year of Nabopolassar, the 43rd year of Nebuchadnezzar, the 2nd year of Awel-Merodach, the 4th year of Negrilassar, during all these 95 years in which I visited the temple of the great Godhead Sin, king of all the gods in heaven and in the netherworld. He looked with favor upon my pious good works and listened to my prayers, accepted my vows. You'll remember that the chronology that we're reading here agrees precisely with those we've already observed. Remember, all these historical witnesses are independent. They are separate sources that all provide the same information about the length of the reigns of these kings. If Jehovah's Witnesses have any chance of proving that their date for the destruction of Jerusalem is correct, they would have to find an additional 20 years to push back the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar to 607 BCE. To be frank, the evidence that's been provided so far may serve on its own to dismiss witness chronology. And yet, there are literal mountains worth of further evidence that secures the chronology that we've established. Archaeologists have uncovered scores of clay tablet receipts. These are receipts from economic transactions from the Neo-Babylonian period. These tablets document the time of a transaction between two parties. Jonsson provides an example of the text on one of these tablets. Inasilla has brought 1 1/2 talents of salt, the regular Satuku offering of the month of Siman for the god Usar Amasu, month of Simanu, 6th day, 1st year of Amel Marduk, the king of Babylon. Notice the dating on this text. Archaeologists have uncovered literally hundreds of thousands of these clay tablet receipts. Hundreds of thousands. So many, in fact, that prior to 1991, only over 10,000 receipts had been published. It's been estimated that there are around 50,000 receipt texts total dating to the Neo-Babylonian period, which means we have roughly 600 dated texts from every single year of this period. From the texts we have published, and where chronological texts are legible, we often have hundreds of documents representing every single year in this period. And, once again, these tablets confirm the chronology that we've been establishing. If you're hoping to defend the date of 607 BCE as the date for the destruction of Jerusalem, you have to ask, why do we have 20 years unaccounted for in these documents? If there are 20 years unaccounted for in our established chronology, why are these 20 years not represented either by the chronologies that we've considered or by the tens of thousands of receipts that we've uncovered? The next line of evidence that makes Watchtower's position even more difficult to defend is that, in addition to the clay receipts we've just mentioned, we've also uncovered tablets that inadvertently document the lives of individuals and families from this period in Babylon. For one example, a cache of receipt tablets were discovered that are all records of transactions handled by the Ajibi clan. The Ajibi clan was a prominent bank in the city of Babylon. This family's business handled financial transactions, including mortgages and loans. we have thousands of tablets that represent transactions handled by this family alone. And from these tablets, scholars have been able to reconstruct the history of this family, who was at the head of the clan, and how long they lived, and when they passed down their business. They're able to show this because the receipts mention the name of the head of the business. This business survived the destruction of Babylon and went into the Persian period. So this is how the chronology for this family works out. It begins with Sula at the head of the firm for 20 years, and then Nabu Ahi Adina for 38 years, and then Iti Marduk Bulatu for 23 years. So that makes it 81 years total. And that runs from the third year of Nebuchadnezzar to the first year of Darius the Mede, Darius the First, which is in 521 BCE. The evidence doesn't allow for there to be a 20-year gap between the capture of Babylon by the Persians and the destruction of Jerusalem. And this isn't the only instance of this kind of evidence. Scholars have been able to reconstruct the lifespans and the various doings of other individuals in the Neo-Babylonian period. Again, the question that this raises for our study is, how can there possibly be a 20-year gap that would allow for Watchtower's dating of the destruction of Jerusalem? Well, one way you could do this, and Jonsson mentions this, that you could speculate that there were some unknown kings who reigned between the reigns of the kings that were mentioned by the evidence that we've considered. But the problem with this is that archaeologists have uncovered chronicles that mention the month and the day when a king died and passed on his throne, and then what month and what day the next king took the throne, and of course the name of that king, and that's all on one tablet. Every king that has been mentioned in our chronology has a corresponding document from this period that tells us when this king died and then who took his throne immediately afterward. Jonsson refers to these as interlocking joints of the Neo-Babylonian period. The evidence produced by various cuneiform tablets keeps us from being able to introduce additional years into the chronology. So as if you needed more evidence supporting this chronology, Jonsson notes that there are synchronisms between the Egyptian chronology of this period and the Neo-Babylonian era. Archaeologists have uncovered a number of death steles from ancient Egypt. The death steles from this period give us chronological information such as the date of a pharaoh's birth, when he was installed as a king, the date of his death, the date of his burial, and the overall length of his life, all in one text. So using these steles and other sources, scholars have reconstructed the chronology of this period in much the same way that we've established the Neo-Babylonian chronology. But important for our discussion is that the Bible and one other Babylonian tablet, one of the royal chronicles, mentions instances when there were interactions, really battles, between the Babylonian kings and the pharaohs of this period. If we use the chronology we've established and note the reports about when these kings are battling and even which kings are involved, we note that these two chronologies synchronize with each other perfectly. However, if we were to date Nebuchadnezzar's reign to an earlier period, as Watchtower does, we would no longer have these synchronisms. And this is bad for Watchtower, because to make their chronology work, they would not only have to find some way to overcome the evidence for the chronology we've presented already, but they would have to undergo the same reconstruction for the Egyptian chronology in order to bring all of these texts back into harmony. What we've considered briefly thus far in this video, Jonsson counts as 7 independent lines of evidence in his book, although you could say we've considered more than 7 pieces of evidence. Jonsson concludes his chapter by noting that this can serve on its own to completely demolish the idea that Jerusalem was destroyed in 607 BCE. But there's more. In our next video, we'll give a brief overview of the additional 7 lines of evidence from astronomy that confirm the chronology that we've established.